Yesterday, we looked at what happened for the Chicago Bears to lose to the Philadelphia Eagles. Today, we'll take a closer look at how it happened thanks to the All-22 Coaches film.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store. On the show today, we go through what we learned from the Bears-Eagles All-22 film to get a better sense of what worked and didn't work for Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears offensive line, where this Bears defense stepped up and also where they continued to struggle, and what we learned about Cairo Santos and his kicking issues, or really more specifically extra point issues, what he did differently later in the game, and why it seems to be different on extra points than it is on field goals, and kind of where that leaves this Bears kicking situation heading into the offseason. But we start with one Justin Fields, because it was another one of these games where it feels like he plays well and has a very good game. And then, of course, at the end, you look at the box score stats, and it's kind of the same story, right? Of, 2/3 completion percentage, 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. But people who didn't watch the actual game will look and say, 150 passing yards, another not so great game from Justin Fields, or another, lack of passing production from Justin Fields. And yes, the offense needed to score more than 20 points. We knew that it was going to take more than 20 points to beat a team like the Philadelphia Eagles when you have a Bears defense that's as limited as it is, even though it played a little bit better than we thought, but going against a team as good as the Philadelphia Eagles. There's no doubt that the Bears offense as a whole needed to be better in this game. But you look at how Fields fared, separate from just that, volume number. I mean, he was still seeing the field well and generally taking good care of the football. I just think the Eagles defense limited a lot of what he was able to do, or a lot of what he wanted to do in terms of the passing game. Some of that is a reflection on the Bears offensive line. Also, the Eagles defense and the Bears offensive line combining to limit some of what Justin Fields wanted to do. But you go back through that game, he didn't really have the opportunities to load up and fire some deep shots in there. The only one that he completed was that play where he got out of the pocket and eventually found Byron Pringle wide open just outside of the end zone, where it was kind of a busted coverage thing where Fields' legs create the opportunity for his arms. And of course, you got to give him credit for seeing and making the throw, but it's the kind of plays that maybe sometimes earlier in his career, he might have just taken off and run with it on that play, but instead kept his eyes downfield a little bit more, was more patient with letting that play develop, and found Byron Pringle for a 35-yard touchdown pass. He got one other shot in down the left sideline, but that was about it. The Eagles were sitting back there and not letting him take anything deep. They wanted him to have to be either a quick rhythm or a check down type of passer that he's not really programmed to be at this stage of his career. It's not really his style of game. And I thought, really through the first half especially, he was playing really well and in a rhythm, and seemed like this offense, and certainly in the passing game, was rolling a bit more than we saw in the second half. It wasn't astronomical numbers, but at halftime, he was 8 of 12 for 81 yards. Had kind of been in a rhythm there. Also sacked 5 times in spite of all that. I mean, and also had rushed for 81 yards in the first half as well. But you saw just how much out of rhythm this offense got into in the second half is really noticeable going back through it. Like, in the first half, you had those 5 sacks, but a lot of the sacks all seemed to come on like third downs that ended drives, but it was like after the drive got going at least a little bit. I don't know if they had any 3 and outs in the first half. They had a 4 and out, but every single drive, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm glancing at them now, with the exception of kneeling down at the end of the half when they weren't trying to, move the ball. Outside, there was not a 3 and outs for the Bears offense in that first half. It was 5 and 6 and outs. I mean, they weren't putting up a ton of points. I think they had 1 touchdown in that first half, and that was all the scoring. But it did seem like, okay, like running game was going a little bit and passing game was going a little bit. And, just besides the third down sacks, everything else seemed to be rolling in some capacity that was something to build off of. It feels like they were right in the game there. But you get into that third quarter, right? And it's like the turnovers set up a lot of the Bears' points. But outside of that, first drive was a 3 and out. Then they got it after the fumble and scored a touchdown on that drive. But then Bears get the ball back, and the Bears fumble themselves, so it's not a 3 and out from just a traditional 3 and out, but like turning the ball over. And then the drive after that is a 3 and out. Like, you didn't have, I don't know if they had a single first down in the whole third quarter. As I'm glancing at it right now, I hadn't even done the math there, that when you have a bunch of 3 and outs and a fumbles, there was a first down on the drive that Velus Jones fumbled. That play was on a first down, but 1 first down in the entire third quarter that was immediately preceded by a fumble. Then they got one right away in the fourth quarter, but that first drive in the fourth quarter was when Justin Fields got hurt on second down. So Nathan Peterman on a sack, or on a second, no, it was a holding on a scramble himself. But then Peterman comes in on 3rd and long, and like, what did you expect? So like, and then the next drive was a touchdown. So it just felt like they couldn't get out of their own way in that third quarter in particular. Like, the sacks were coming a little bit quicker. The running game wasn't really finding some of the same windows there. And then, of course, Justin Fields gets hurt and Velus Jones fumbles. And it's just like the signs of a team that's just not very good. And a lot of that comes on that offensive line, where you saw Alex Leatherwood was charged with 4 pressures on 10 pass blocking snaps by Pro Football Focus. Horrendous pass protection from Alex Leatherwood. Let's sit him down. Give Larry Borum a chance in that rotation, or just start Riley Reif. But I don't know, you need much more. Leatherwood's still struggling and still has a long way to go in development. No need to get Justin Fields killed as you go through that process. And a rough game from Cody Whitehair at left guard as well. Got beat a number of times by a very good defensive line, but he's been a little bit disappointing this season, and given how high his price tag is, his cap hit on the contract, makes me wonder if the Bears don't consider a left guard change. I'm not even saying they should, but just that he is expensive and he's not one of Ryan Poles' guys, that would they consider releasing him, saving the cap space, and getting a new left guard in there. I think you got bigger fish to fry. I think there are more important holes to fill before you get to Whitehair there, but just something I want to put on the radar is, like, he hasn't been as good and maybe isn't earning the full value of his contract right now. We'll see how the Bears handle that this offseason. Still think, there's plenty of blame to go on the Bears defense in this game, but also some area where guys stepped up. We'll take a second look at the Jaylon Johnson, A.J. Brown battle that wasn't as good on second watch as I thought it was on first watch, and where things kind of went well and not well against Jalen Hurts, next on Locked On Bears. I'm really excited about a new sponsor and a new partner here on the Locked On Bears podcast. It's the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. If you're like me, you've dreamed about becoming like a general manager and managing your own football franchise. But if you're also like me, you're a little disappointed about some of the limitations you have on, the big name video games that are on console systems. But our friends at Ultimate Football GM allow you to manage every strategic aspect of your team, run through the season, and lead your team to glory. You hire the coaches, the coordinators, you trade players, you make draft picks, you navigate your franchise through free agency and the draft with all the ups and downs of the season. It's a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. We've got a league on Ultimate GM set up between all of our Locked On podcast hosts, and I'm playing the slow game here, right? I know the team starts out as not very good, but we're working our way through right now, adding some building blocks, kind of like the Bears. We're in a rebuilding mode, but we're going to get our Justin Fields type quarterback and lead this team to a victory. So Locked On Bears listeners can get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you use our promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On, all caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the United States, but also for our friends overseas in the UK or Australia or up north in Canada. You can book a spacious SUV for a minivan or a minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic car or luxury car for a special event, a birthday, or a holiday. Maybe you just need to get from point A to point B and just want an affordable economy car to fit your budget. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Going back through this Bears defense, I wanted to get a better sense of the Jaylon Johnson versus A.J. Brown battle because, of course, when you're watching on the broadcast, half the time or most of the time, the cornerback and the wide receiver go off the screen, and you don't know what happens. And unless Jalen Hurts throws the ball that way, and then you can kind of see what's happening if they're in one-on-one coverage. But even that isn't necessarily always the case. And it felt like on the first watch, there were two deep shots that Hurts dropped in a perfect ball over A.J. Brown's shoulders where Jaylon Johnson was in pretty good coverage, and it was just even a better throw than otherwise pretty solid coverage. And second watch through, there were more times when it felt like A.J. Brown got the best of him, but there were also more times when I thought Jaylon Johnson was right in there in coverage. And I don't know how to properly characterize it because it's like Jaylon Johnson made some really nice plays in this game, but also got beat in this game, and it felt sort of all or nothing. It was like in a lot of these plays, it's either Brown beat him and got more yards than he should have, or Jaylon Johnson was all over him and totally shut him down on the plays. And it didn't feel like there was too much of the middle ground where it was like, oh, it was good coverage, but it wasn't a shutdown. And it wasn't a big play, but it was a little completion, right? It kind of felt like very boom or bust in the Jaylon Johnson versus A.J. Brown matchups. Like Jaylon Johnson had 3 direct pass breakups in one-on-one coverage versus A.J. Brown. There was the slant route early on. There was a shot towards the end zone on the left side of the field where he was beaten but got a hand up and batted the pass sort of mid-air before it quite got to A.J. Brown's hands. And I can't remember what the third one was off the top of my head, but it was 3 or 4 of those examples are great play and coverage by Jaylon Johnson. One broke up a 4th down pass that may have been a first down if it was caught, and another one that was a touchdown saving pass breakup. These are high impact plays that made a big difference in the game. That if Jaylon Johnson had not been able to make those plays, the Eagles score maybe 7 points on one of them and maybe lead to more points and set it to turnover on downs on the other drive that directly assist this Bears team based on a good play that Jaylon Johnson made in coverage on A.J. Brown. But there were also, 4 or 5 catches for a good 100+ yards, multiple first downs that A.J. Brown beat Jaylon Johnson. Not horrendously. I don't think he was ever smoked and just totally out of position and no chance of catching up. It wasn't any of those one-sided outcomes that way. But A.J. Brown's a really good receiver, and he got the better of Jaylon Johnson a few times. So I'm kind of left feeling good progress from Jaylon Johnson, but like we kept saying yesterday, he's not Darrelle Revis. He's not Jalen Ramsey. We shouldn't expect him. I don't think we are expecting him to be Darrelle Revis and Jalen Ramsey. But he played like a guy that made some impact plays against a really good wide receiver in a really good offense. And I think that's encouraging, even if you can point to other times when maybe things weren't as good or as consistent for him. Because, you look across the board, the Eagles were getting yards against everybody. And A.J. Brown was too. He and Devontae Smith, right? They had catches. They beat Jaylon Jones. They beat Kyler Gordon. They got a couple of matchups one-on-one with Jaquan Brisker in there. It really wasn't just all of a sudden everything on Jaylon Johnson the whole time. Devontae Smith had 126 yards and 5 catches, and those 5 catches came against 4 different receivers in coverage based on PFF's tracking there. And with Jaylon Johnson and A.J. Brown too, wasn't a lot of man coverage. I think the Bears were in man 20 to 30% of their plays-ish, somewhere between a fourth and a third, I'd say, on that spectrum there. So yeah, sometimes it's one-on-one coverage in zone. When you're cover 3 and on the outside, it's basically like man coverage, but it's a little bit different in terms of what the quarterback is reading and then where he assumes the safeties might be versus reading man coverage and knowing where the safeties might be. There's some different layers to that, but so it makes it a complicated eval. But overall, I mean, I think he got beat more than I thought he did on first watch, but also was reminded of the plays where he played really well, and I'm left somewhere in the middle on how that ultimately played out. I really thought Nick Morrow stood out as a guy too that was just locked in a lot of ways. And I was surprised that we really didn't see Jalen Hurts attack the Bears linebackers that much in coverage. Like, they went over the middle of the field a few times, but a lot of times it was, like still with the slot cornerback there in coverage and responsible, or, one of the safeties coming down to be there. And of course they targeted linebackers occasionally, but especially, Sanborn goes out and you've got Joe Thomas and Matthew Adams in there with Morrow. I was surprised they didn't choose to attack that more. And I mean, even Morrow himself wasn't really targeted a ton, but I thought he was a little bit more instinctive, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more physical coming down in run defense, and particularly keeping an eye on Jalen Hurts. I think just having seen and practiced against Justin Fields all season, I think he was just a little bit quicker and a little bit more ready to respond to a quarterback on the move, whether it's in the running game or the passing game, reading the read option correctly, reading the jet sweeps correctly, knowing where the ball was and getting there more quickly than we've seen him in a lot of games this season. I was impressed with Nick Morrow. Now, bigger picture-wise, they really did not do a good job, kind of as expected, getting after Jalen Hurts enough. And I think they got a little pressure here and there. They tried blitzing. They tried some different things with the blitzes and bringing guys from different spots, and I appreciated the creativity. But even on those, right, the blitzes were not necessarily getting home. And I'm glad the PFF has some numbers to actually put to what you see on film there. The Bears blitzed 11 times and pressured him on 1 of those 11 blitzes based on their coverage, based on their tracking. The Bears got pressure on him, I think, 6 times, but 5 of those came when they didn't blitz. And I think some of it was was Hurts holding onto the ball a little bit longer on some of those plays. But, that ended up being like 1 sack and a few scrambles. He was just 1 of 3 passing on his plays under pressure, and including one of the two interceptions was one of those pass attempts. So it was effective when they did pressure him. It just was very few and far between, and the blitzing, he was pretty quick to read the blitz and get rid of it. Right? It wasn't always that they'd blitz 6 guys and all guys would get picked up, and Jalen Hurts just has all day to throw when he's blitzing, but he did a really good job, I think, of pre-snap recognizing when there might be a blitz. And then when it did come, he sped up his delivery quite a bit and was able to get rid of that ball and make sure it more often than not didn't affect too much of what he wanted to do in the passing game there. I think for all intents and purposes, that's kind of what we expected across the board, right? We expected the pass rush to struggle. We expected Jaylon Johnson to have some good moments and some bad moments, and kind of gave us an as expected defensive performance. Maybe it was a little bit better overall, but still not a winning quality of defensive performance. And it wasn't exactly the quality we were looking for from Cairo Santos either in the special teams game. And I think, I never want to spend too much time talking about kickers, but when we're up to 5 missed PATs this season, we got to talk about what's going on with Cairo Santos and the change he made that he thinks can solve his PAT problem next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is presented by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks puts you in complete control. Unlike some of those other daily fantasy platforms that your result is reliant on what other people do in their lineups. And whether you win or lose will depend on, was someone else's lineup better than yours. But with PrizePicks, there's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry across all of sports, but including your Chicago Bears. And it's super easy to enter too. Just takes 60 seconds or less. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. You understand? Just don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up for that instant deposit match up to $100. Generally speaking, I didn't leave the game against the Eagles ready to panic about Cairo Santos and the kicking situation. We talked about it a little bit on yesterday's podcast. Like, yeah, PATs should be automatic and should be the easy ones, and they're only worth 1 point. Like, Santos's missed PATs have not necessarily been the sole reason the Bears lose football games. You can make the argument that, well, they miss a PAT here, so then they're down 4 instead of 3, or they're down 9 instead of 8, so they have to go for a touchdown instead of a field goal in some situation, or go for 2 instead of an extra point in some situation. Like, it does have influence on the game, but Bears needed more than 1 point in every game they've lost this season, and so it's not the end of the world, but it feels like it's reached this point now where you missed 5 of them, and you're kind of scratching your head and wondering, like, is this indicative of even worse to come here? And I don't know. I'm willing certainly to give Cairo Santos some patience here, and I don't think anybody should be clamoring to cut him, release him, replace him on the roster right now, because he's still hitting 90% of his regular field goals this season, and he's been 100% on everything under 40 yards. He missed 1 from 50 plus and 1 from 40 to 49 yards. I mean, when he goes out there for a field goal, it's been pretty automatic. It's been almost as automatic as the PATs are supposed to be. But like, it's also like, it's kind of a mental thing or what it's been. But Santos said after the game, or was it on Monday? I forget exactly which day he said it, but that after halftime of that game, he made an adjustment. He said, you know what? I've been kicking all of my PATs from the right hash mark for so long. And he said it's just been kind of automatic for him, and that's why he just kind of kept doing it that way. But his quote was that he felt like there's a glitch with his visuals from the right hash for the extra point. Like, because he was saying, he's not missing any kicks at practice, so he doesn't think it's really a technique thing. But he said he tries the extra point from the right hash and tries to curl the ball in through the center of the uprights that way. And he thought he was hitting it well but they were still kind of getting off the line. So after halftime, he practiced some PATs, tried the left in the middle, and he said he found himself like having to try the PATs from a different spot. It was like new and fresh and like a new challenge where he had to like almost like focus a little bit more. Like it wasn't so automatic. He wasn't, I don't want to say like taking it for granted, right? But it was like he'd been kicking it from the right hash so often that he didn't really need to think about it or pay extra attention to it. And maybe as a result, he was getting too, again, I don't want to say like fast and loose with it, because I'm not an expert on kicking by any means, but just that kicking the PATs from the left and center hash made him have to sort of like reset and focus on it in a different way and mentally sort of look at it and line it up differently in a way that wasn't as automatic, but having to be that sort of deliberate, a little bit more deliberate about the process, much like a field goal where he doesn't have control over what hash it's going to be. That he felt like allowed him to lock in and dial in a little bit more for the remaining PAT attempts the Bears had in that game. And I'm kind of willing to say, okay, let's see how that goes, right? I mean, he's earned a certain benefit of the doubt given the last couple of seasons that we've seen from him kicking at a pretty high level in Chicago. And, we've seen plenty of kickers in between Robbie Gould and Cairo Santos that have not been able to kick at a particularly high level in Chicago. So I'm not in a hurry to replace one or, plan out the departure of one that hasn't completely imploded yet, right? I mean, we're seeing warning signs, yellow flags. I mean, maybe red flags, but not 5-alarm fire just yet, but red flags, we'll say. But we're not at total disaster just yet. Get him out of here. And I'm willing to say, okay, he's been pretty good up to this point, and it's just extra points. Let's see how over these last 3 games, what the PATs look like, and if this adjustment solves that issue. It was funny. Prior to the Eagles game, I was on an Eagles podcast. It wasn't on the Locked On Network. It was someone else's podcast. And he had, we hadn't played the Eagles since 2019, so I hadn't been on his podcast since then. And he mentioned something about, is it nice to not have 10 kickers competing for your team, in the offseason and trying to figure out a kicker situation. And lo and behold, in this game, we're talking about the kicker situation. What is it with the Eagles? The Bears playing the Eagles and something going wrong for kickers. Maybe it's just a weird franchise curse thing against that team, and maybe that's a sign that Cairo Santos can figure things out. And at the very least, no reason not to still have some kind of kicker competition for him. I mean, I think that's just good every offseason to have, at the very least, another name at the top of your free agent list that was there with you through training camp and the preseason, that if Santos gets hurt or suspended for some reason, right? Like if for whatever reason something happens and you need another kicker, there's a guy who's been in the building during training camp and preseason that's not just an undrafted rookie free agent that never plays in the NFL ever again and was just purely a camp body. Like you're not going to spend anything more than the veteran minimum on some kind of kicker competition, no kind of major contract of any kind, but just someone else to say, all right, like get another kicker in there, Cairo. You've been great at practice and you stay great at practice. Nothing to worry about. Just keep doing your thing. But we got another guy in here too, in case that PAT problem picks up, or if sometimes kickers just hit ruts. I mean, we've seen that over the last few years in Chicago, right? Do you trust Cairo Santos to be a 10, 15-year kicker like Robbie Gould? I don't know if he's quite earned that yet, but he's earned the benefit of the doubt to keep going until it stops working. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's not broken, but maybe it's a little bit out of whack. And if this adjustment can get it back into whack with the PATs, full speed ahead, keep rolling with Cairo. Let's not take a 90% field goal kicker for granted, even if right now he's an 83% extra point kicker. Because you always go for 2 in some of those situations, but in some of those field goal situations, if it's 4th and long, you don't want to go for it, and you don't want to punt it from plus territory. Otherwise, you'll get made fun of the way the Bears did against the Eagles there when the wind apparently was too big of a factor to attempt that kick with Cairo Santos. We'll see what happens with the kicking game against the Buffalo Bills this week. Keep tuning in to Locked On Bears as we slowly turn our attention that way. We'll have crossover Thursday with Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. We'll put together a game plan on Friday for how the Bears can try and pull off that upset and get a big win here late in the season. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, we here on the Locked On Podcast Network are your team every day. So if you want that advanced scouting report on what's going on with the Buffalo Bills, go check out Locked On Bills. Joe's a great guy, a personal friend of mine, somebody I've met in person many times, and we'll see again here at the Senior Bowl at the end of January in Mobile. A great guy, not only knows football and the NFL draft really well, but also, of course, covering the Buffalo Bills every single day. Good dude. Good football analyst. Go check out Locked On Bills to learn more about your Bears opponent. Then come on back for another episode of Locked On Bears tomorrow. And of course, you got to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.